Welcome to Action on Pain, a podcast dedicated to highlighting the significant efforts underway in Canada to address chronic pain.
By presenting perspectives from individuals who live with pain, researchers, clinicians, and other stakeholders, we explore various impacts on people's lives and the initiatives, research endeavors, and the committed professionals working to effect meaningful change.
This work is guided by Health Canada's Action Plan for Pain. Join us as we raise awareness and share stories that are shaping the future of pain management in Canada.
Hello, everyone. This is Virginia McIntyre here, and I would like to thank you all for joining another great Action on Pain podcast. So it's great to be back in this virtual studio again. This is our second one we have done since we've been back after the summer, and Keith has had his long trip across the country.
Yep.
Yeah. And can you believe the summer is over? Technically, we're into the fall now.
First day of fall was yesterday, I understand. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's something. Yeah. So we're glad to be back, and I'm happy to be here with Keith today. Unfortunately, Jennifer sends her regrets. She is tending to a personal family issue and sends her regrets to our listeners. And Keith and I are joined here today with Lesley.
Yeah. Thanks, Virginia. And just a little context, Virginia's coming from one side of the country. She's over in Nova Scotia, and I'm way bookend on the other side in British Columbia. And Lesley will be joining us from not quite in the middle. But with that, Lesley, thanks for joining us today. I'm just going to introduce you a little bit to our listeners, and then we're going to have a really nice conversation about the amazing things that you do. So we are very, very pleased to have Lesley Singer join us today. Lesley is a born and raised Montrealer. And after going through Montreal recently, it's a beautiful city. She's a registered physiotherapist, a graduate of McGill in physiotherapy in 1995, with a Master of Rehabilitation Science in 2010. Lesley has experience teaching pre-licensure physiotherapy students about pain management and has been a course coordinator and lecturer in the Certificate of Chronic Pain Management for Healthcare Professionals at McGill University's Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences for over 10 years. Lesley is also a person with lived experience of chronic neuropathic hemifacial pain for over 20 years, as well as chronic low back pain for over 10. Lesley has been involved with the Chronic Pain Network since its inception as a co-chair of the Knowledge Translation Committee, and she's now part of the Knowledge Mobilization Committee. She became involved with the Chronic Pain Network to combine her experience as a clinician, researcher, educator, and a person living with pain to improve pain management in Canada. In addition to her work with the Chronic Pain Network, Lesley is also involved with the Quebec Pain Research Network. And the last thing I want to mention, because I got a chance to see this a couple of years ago, is Lesley was the Canadian Pain Society's Person with Lived Experience Award recipient in 2024. And it was a pleasure to be at that meeting when you received that award. So well-deserved, and what an amazing background and resume you bring. So thanks for joining us today, Lesley.
Thanks, both of you, for having me. I'm excited.
Thank you. And I'll just say wow to that whole bio. Wow. I did have the privilege to actually present Lesley with her Canadian Pain Society Leadership Award a couple of years ago, Lesley, and it was quite an honor to present that. So, Lesley, we noticed in that wonderful bio that you wear multiple hats. Therefore, you bring quite a unique perspective. You bring the perspective as a clinician, pain educator, and a person with lived experience. They all align with our goals with the action plan. We'll specific about with three of the goals, which, are the ones that involve knowledge, skills, and educational supports to access management of pain and understanding of pain as a legit biopsychosocial condition. With this, now, with that big mouthful, can you share your thoughts on the importance of educating healthcare providers and those who live with pain and why this is important and you took this work on?
I think there I combine all my experience. And as a clinician, I always remember treating people with low back pain. And when I started as a physiotherapist, it was kind of like the conception that when people were coming in with work injuries, they were typically faking because they didn't want to work, many of them. And I think this was really thought of a lot. And when the new person came into the department, the new person took over that portfolio because nobody else wanted to do it. They were boring. They didn't want to work anyway. I think that always stuck with me, especially when I developed chronic pain myself and started to question what happened with all those people? Did they have something similar to what I had? And so when I couldn't work anymore, I went back to school because I thought of all those things and how I could change it, how I could change beliefs and attitudes of clinicians, physiotherapists more likely, but of clinicians, because it affected me, it affected so many people, and I just didn't want it to stay that way.
That's actually really powerful because you've said the words that I think a lot of people don't say out loud, is that when you got into your profession in physiotherapy, that those with lower back pain were just sort of seen, it sounds like, through a lens of their pain's not real and they're faking it. They don't want to go to work. Was it that prevalent in your industry?
It certainly was very prevalent in workers, work-related injuries.
Work-related injuries. Okay.
Lesley, I'm a work-related injury. And going through that when I did, and that's many years ago, over a decade, that's the experience I've had.
I'm just really fascinated by that. I'm almost at a loss for words, which never happens. But that is just really foundational to, we talk a lot collectively in our advocacy work and what we do about how people with pain are dismissed and sometimes even abandoned. And so to hear, from your viewpoint as a physiotherapist, that, the industry for workers just initially it sounds like when they saw a name on a chart and that they were a worker, it was just like, well, this isn't going to be real right off the bat. That's amazing to hear. And I'm wondering how much of that might still happen today.
I think that it still does, because when I'm in the certificate teaching, a lot of times we'll have clinicians who've been working for a long time, but we also have clinicians who just graduated from the program. And they introduce themselves at the beginning of the course. I'd have to say that a lot of them will say, I'm a new grad, and who do I work with? I work with workmen's compensation and car accidents. And so that makes me think, oh, so this still goes on, because those injuries, looking back now, are one of the most complex cases. And yet you take a new grad and you put them on those cases, and then you say, but they don't want to go back to work because they don't get better. But perhaps the clinician just doesn't know enough to be able to treat them the way they need to be treated. And so I do believe it goes on because they introduce themselves and say specifically when they're working in a clinic, I work with people with work-related injuries. And so I can't say for sure, but I do know that the process of giving these kind of cases to new grads is prevalent.
Can you imagine the stress on that worker when they know that people are thinking they don't want to go back to work? So we know stress makes pain worse. So can you just imagine the thoughts and the words that are being said in that? Because I know it's been said to me, that impact on a worker.
I think you're right, Virginia. And I think for a long time, I looked back and thought, how did I treat those people? What did I do? That wasn't fair, that I had preconceived notions. I accepted that from other therapists. And I guess lately I was speaking to a physiotherapist who is in a clinic, and she asked me, she knows I'm always in research. And so she says, you know what I want to know? Why we let them not work. We want them back to work, which is true. But on the same line, you want them back to work, which is safe and which has accommodated them for whatever they are not able to do. Mm-hmm. So it's not just about forcing them back to work. So we'll take away the money that they get because they're not working and force them back to work. The issue is much bigger than that.
That's such an important point, because when I say we know, that again, I do air quotes for people who are listening. I mean, we know, but there's research and there's just a lot of talk and understanding that workers who are off on work, the majority, and I would say the vast majority, want to get back to work because there's a social isolation, there's a loss of self-identity. They don't want to be sitting at home. They want to get back to their life. And so when they're met from the day they walk into the clinic with, well, you're faking and this isn't real and you want to be off, but they're like, no, I want to get back to work. There's a real disconnect between the patient and their therapist right from the start.
And then looked at that they're lazy and going to a clinic 4 days a week and to all these appointments. And I know for me, it was often 4 or 5 days a week. It's all consuming.
That's right. And, when the therapist sees that person day after day and they don't see tomorrow an improvement from yesterday, but they're not going to. And they are still very biomedical. I wish I didn't have to say that, but they are. They really are. And until we change that, When I speak to physiotherapists, I mean, a lot of them are really embracing the biopsychosocial model. And then you have the others who didn't go into physiotherapy to talk about the soft skills. They don't want to do this communication and how are you feeling and what do you believe and they want to work on that hip. They want to work on that back. They want to do manual therapy. And so until they learn that, they can do manual therapy if that's what they're into, but talk to your patient at the same time. Learn about these things because you can work on a patient and get quite a rich conversation going. And so you can cover those things that you need to cover and at the same time be that manual therapist you want to be. So it depends, I don't know. I think they have to embrace the fact that we are people-centered and we have to look at how they feel, how they're acting, what they believe, what they want to do. We have to know them. We really have to know them. And that's the key.
We just need to capture everything you said, and we need to just force that into day one of manual clinician therapy school. Because you just answered the question I was going to ask, which was, do you think that some of the challenges that still exist are due to how, manual therapists are still taught, in their undergrad and even their postgrad? And it sounds like you say there are many who are open to the biopsychosocial, but my understanding is that's not really integrated in their formal education. They might find it on their own because they're interested, but are they still mostly being taught you have a person who has a hip problem and you need to fix their hip problem? You don't really need to worry about what their life goals are. You just need to fix their hip.
I would have to say being involved with research, mostly with physiotherapists, but with clinicians as well. I do think that since we've brought the voice of the person living with pain into the actual classroom, students are kind of in awe. I find they really are attentive. They're listening to what you say. They're reflecting on what you're saying. And they are learning that pain is biopsychosocial because they're speaking to the person who lives it. They're not listening to a lecturer who's telling you these are the things. They're listening to the story, which has so much more power, which has so much better delivery. And since we've been doing that, we have had so much success in people talking about it.
I think it's amazing. And, and maybe you can explain to our listeners a little bit more. How are you doing that? How is this happening? I know behind the scenes a little bit, but can you explain a little to them? How are we doing this?
I could break down those walls.
Yeah. What we're actually doing is, and I hate to say, we've had trouble getting funding for this type of research.
Right.
That
Surprise.
the task force says is so needed.
Yes.
But I've worked with Dr. Weidman at McGill, and he's always had an idea that the voice of the lived experience is powerful. And so it started by him asking me, can you come in 3 times in my semester? Number 1, talk to them about your journey of pain. Number 2, talk to them about your opioids and your journey with going to the maximum levels of opioids and then wanting to come off them, tapering down to 0. Can you talk to them about that experience? And third was just coming back in the end to see if people wanted to talk about anything or had questions. And I think Tim and I both saw, because I taught the course before Tim did, that students really listened. They really had many questions. And I'm a very open person, so I always tell them, any question goes, just ask it and I'll answer to the best of my ability.
Right.
And they do. And I go in French as well in the University of Montreal, and I do it there. Yep. And I'm always terrified because my French is so-so. But in those classes, there's 70 students. And I would say 3/4 of them are really engaged and listening and have questions. We always end it on time, not on the fact that people have finished asking questions, because there are always more. And so I think we realized this is the way to go. And so we started to look at, okay, we have to go back and see, what is it students need to learn? What are they learning? Compare that. What do we need to change the curriculum? And so we started by doing that. We started by looking at what are the competencies students need according to physiotherapy. And then we looked at, okay, But what if people living with pain want you to know and ask about their pain? So then we had the research that was there, we had the voice of the lived experience, and we said, all right, we need the voice of the lived experience now into the classroom. And so we did a project where we took 3 universities and we had a group, Lynn Cooper and myself, we were the people with lived experience on the team. We got together through our networks, people living with pain who wanted to influence education. And so they were invited to speak for 1 hour. No, we gave them a preparatory course on how this works, but didn't tell them what to say, what to talk about. Just you're going to have a conversation with 1 or 2 students about chronic pain, and they will be able to ask you questions, and you always have the right to not answer them. And we were blown away with the results. I mean, students, I filled in for a person with lived experience that didn't show up. After that, I got an email sent through the school telling me that I had changed their whole belief system, that they were going to really work in a different way now. And that so touched me that this is what we're doing. And people are coming away saying, you know what? My pain was used for a good purpose. And I feel good about that. And so you had a win situation for the person with lived experience, and you had a win situation for the clinician who was able to engage with someone without being judged, without having a professor looking over them, without even having another person in the room. They got to talk about whatever they wanted. And this was what they said was that, wow, to be able to have the freedom to ask what I really wanted to ask, but not worry, oh, is the professor going to think this is a stupid question or I shouldn't be talking about that with the person? I can talk about whatever I really want to know. And that's what it was. So it was fabulous. And we're continuing. Now we need to do a formal evaluation to prove that this does do something so that we can get funding to put this into more curriculums and more places.
That's incredible. So first, I just want to go back and we'll just do another little shout out to Dr. Tim Weidman. We all know him and love him dearly. I think he's ahead of his time as a clinician, as a researcher.
Absolutely.
But I mean, what a powerful story that you just shared. And that really just, gives me hope, to hear that, because, sometimes we get caught up in, this is hard to get, we're all trying to make those inroads, but to hear your experiences and what you've done with Dr. Weidman and the effect that it's having, and somebody reached out and said it changed their entire belief system, means that what we're doing, and it might not be widespread yet, but that it works. And so you need to formalize it and just make it part of healthcare now. So that was incredible.
It also adds to the pain task force goal that wants to do that. So it's really
That's amazing.
That's what I was going to say. I think it adds on to, and you talked about being on knowledge mobilization committee, but it adds on that knowledge mobilization, these even one-to-one conversations, because it's so broad.
Yeah. And I think Virginia's had opportunities and I to present to post-secondary and talk about our pain experiences. I think what's unique with you is the richness of your experiences, both as a person who lives with pain, but that's not who you are, right? It's part of who you are. But you stand in front of a bunch of students who are getting into the profession that you were in for years. So you bring some credibility right away as a clinician. And I think that helps. But it's your story, your journey, which is obviously more powerful. And that's obviously what people need to hear.
Never forget the power of the stories.
Yes, so true. And that we have to get them out more. And I believe we have to get them out there to primary schools so that, the kid who's been coddled and, oh, you fell and like you have a sore and a bobo and you don't need to do this.
Yeah.
That's going to affect their beliefs. And so, let's get that message out that pain is there for a reason. It tells you something, but it's not the end all. It heals. Most of the time it heals and gets better. And if they learn that as a little kid, they won't be as afraid.
That's
brilliant.
That is brilliant. And can't think of a better message to land on right there, because I agree with you so much. And to get it in front of the kids, it's like recycling programs. Years ago, they started to teach the children, right? And now it becomes normalized. And to get in front of the kids and say, pain has a purpose. but sometimes this purpose changes. And just because you feel pain, it doesn't necessarily mean that something is damaged or you're broken. And if we can get it to them and normalize it that way. So I think that's a beautiful way to wrap up our conversation today, Lesley. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It was great. The time has just passed so quickly.
It does. It's really fun. We could go on for hours, and we always reserve the right as the host to be able to invite people back later. So we're not saying we won't have an opportunity for another conversation.
Okay.
With that, Lesley, we just really want to thank you for sharing your time and your experiences with us today.
Thank you, Lesley. We'd also like to take the time to thank all of you who are tuning in to the Action on Pain podcast. We hope this episode has shed some light on the important work being done in Canada as guided by Health Canada's An Action Plan for Pain in Canada. Until next time.
Thank you for joining us today on Action on Pain. If you enjoyed the discussion, please follow us on your preferred podcast platform to stay updated, and please share with your networks. A 5-star rating and review would help others find our show. Your feedback is important.
This podcast does not contain any medical advice. Please consult with your doctor if you have any questions or concerns.
The Action on Pain podcast is made possible by the generous support of the Chronic Pain Network, a national research and knowledge mobilization network.
The views, opinions, and content shared by hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the Chronic Pain Network or its funders.